Adventurous kids explore with education and learning what a wild life is in the Everglades. I want to explore the Museum of Discovering Science. What plants do butterflies like? I want to know about Key West. Adventurous kids, learning and fun. Adventurous kids!
Hi! Today I'm going to talk about comedy and even do some comedy for you. My name is Lucas Jason and I am a local stand-up comedian here in South Florida, and I do open mics and I've done shows at the Improv and I've even produced a few shows of myself. So I'm super excited to talk to the Adventurous Kids all about comedy. What is comedy? What is comedy? Right? Comedy is anything that makes you laugh, right? You know, there's things that are physical comedy, right? When something situationally funny happens. A lot of sitcoms use physical comedy to get a laugh. For example, if somebody is walking and they slip on a banana peel, right? That's a classic. As long as they're not hurt, that's funny, right? Then there's being funny where you use your words cleverly to set up an expectation. And then in the next breath, you shatter that expectation. And it's in the incongruency, which is a big word that means not the same, is where we find comedy. Another way that people have described comedy, which is another kind of comedy, is that comedy equals tragedy over time. So often the funniest things stem out of the saddest situations. We see that in a lot of darker comedies. We see that in an expression that we call gallows humor. I don't know if that's too dark, but that's what it's called. Gallows humor, which is we're in the worst situation we could possibly be in, might as well laugh, right? All of those are different types of comedy. So when we think of the history of comedy, humans have laughed since the beginning of time, right? It's a way of coping with life. It's a way of saying, you know, life is tough, life is hard. It's one of those pockets of joy that we get to find in the world, right? Much like love and family. Laughter gets to be one of those things, and it's something that we get to share with those people. As far as like the first documented comedy, that's going to be more or less happening in like ancient Greek and Roman times. And I won't lie, I can't speak as much to that type of comedy, but when you get to the invention of the video camera, right? You have Edison and you have moving pictures. You get two major film stars that are breakouts in comedy. You've got Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Most people are familiar with Charlie Chaplin. Keaton was up there too. They used to call him Mr. Stoneface because he was the king of delivering just hand-faced seriousness as just absolute chaos was happening around him. Right? And then you move into sound and you've got the Three Stooges, which is more physical comedy. I would say around the 1950s and 60s, as television started to enter the home, we had something in a late night talk show. And that really started to build a need to have comedy come in word form, right? Not just be physical, sometimes be physical, but not just physical, right? Cleverness was also, something that was sought for. So from late night television, you get stand-up comedy, and the boom of that happened in the 80s and 90s. Probably the biggest name that people are most familiar with is Jerry Seinfeld. And you can look up, he's got loads of material on writing jokes and his style for writing. But the biggest thing is when you go to write comedy, you want to have what's called a setup and a punchline. And I'm going to pick up my pen. Okay. So you get a setup plus a punchline. Right? So you have this formula here. Setup plus punchline equals ha ha ha, right? Ideally, that's what we'd like. Now, the setup is just like it sounds. It sets up, it builds an expectation. So, to give you an example, many people are shocked to learn I went to college. Yeah, I didn't study philosophy, punchline, but I thought about it. Right? So I'm setting you up with the expectation, I didn't study philosophy. Well, I'm probably going to tell you something about philosophy. having to do with college, because we're talking about college. The punchline is I say, I thought about it, right? And that's funny because philosophy, what do? You just think about stuff, right? So you have set up punchline, set up an expectation, shatter that expectation. Another example, right? Where I set you up, I do the setup, I say, I saw a sign that said, be brave enough to be bad at something. And I was like, I'm fearless. I'm bad at so many things, right? So the setup is with this inspirational quote that's supposed to be like guiding you towards like trying new things, right? That's supposed to be the meaning you take away. And the punchline, the expectation that was subverted is, that's not the way I took that that's not the way I took that statement, right? I decided that it meant if you're bad at things, you're brave. Well, I'm fearless because I'm bad at so many things, right? Set up the expectation, shatter the expectation, right? That's set up punchline. Now, that's your classic style of comedy. That's what you would do with, those are called one-liners, because they're about one line, maybe 1.5 lines. And they get you quick laughs, which is what you want. There's something in comedy called LPMs, and those are your laughs per minute. That's why you'll see a lot of comedians recording their sets, and they watch them back to see just how many laughs they're getting per minute. Ideally, you want to stay in a 2 to 3 laughs per every 30 to 40 seconds. So you're looking at 5 to 6 laughs per minute is an ideal comedy. So, which is why a lot of mistakes that new comedians make is their setups are too long. Even as someone, this is my 4th year doing comedy, some of my setups are still a little bit too wordy. And so going through and editing your jokes, a lot of people think being a stand-up comedian is getting up on stage and just being funny. And there are certainly moments of that. That's called crowd work. But for most comedians, particularly the ones who make it professionally, that's all prepared material. And even the stuff that seems very off the cuff, I promise you, happened off the cuff once at a show and then gets planted so it keeps happening, right? Another popular form of comedy that's happening now is storytelling. And storytelling is, everybody has that fun uncle or crazy aunt who, whenever we get the family together, has those amazing stories and can keep an audience captivated. And the truth of those stories is, if you're related to the person, you're willing to sit through a kind of long setup. But when you're telling a story on stage, it's important to have laughs along the way. So Christopher Titus, who's a very well-known comedian, has a really good practice when it comes to storytelling for stand-up comedy, where he writes out his entire story word for word and skips every other line and treats each line like the setup. Like each line is setting up an expectation, so he has a punch along the way, so that he's telling a story that's strung together through a series of setup, punchline, so that you're not waiting the whole story to get this one big laugh at the end. You're getting these decent laughs along the way for a big payoff at the end. And a lot of times people will say, is it true? Or is that story true? And here's the truth. 90% of the time, that story is probably half true, half elaborated for the stage. Very rarely, but it does happen, does a full true story make it to the stage. Because the truth is, life is funny, but not funny enough to keep us captivated for, when you're doing a stand-up comedy show. So, the truth is, a lot of those stories, you go, oh, that's crazy, I can't believe that happened. Well, it probably didn't happen quite like that. So that's storytelling comedy. And then there's crowd work, of course, another with the rise of TikTok, crowd work got very, very popular. And crowd work is tricky, I will tell you, I go to an open mic every night of the week. And every night of the week, especially in Miami, there's somebody who's just trying to do an entire set of crowd work of just, hi, is that your girlfriend? Where are you from? And it can fall flat. So what I always tell young comics is have prepared material and carve out a little bit of time for crowd work. And then do something better than, where are you from? Or, what do you do for a living? Or is this your partner? Because those are the questions that all the comedians are going to ask over the course of the night. In fact, I was at an open mic one time where the same couple was asked if they were a couple, 4 comedians in a row, and we all had a good laugh about it, because it was like, you're not even paying attention to the show, man. Don't ask them a question we've already heard. So I always recommend, with crowd work, have interesting questions. I used to do crowd work and say, you know, I'm a teacher during the day, so I don't really know how to talk to adults. I really just spend my day talking to kids. And I'd look at the biggest, toughest guy in the audience and I go, you think your dad could beat up my dad? And then he'd always be like, I go, he probably could. My dad has MS, right? And then I walk on and I get a little bit of laugh and I move on. But it's always good to have a little bit of plan. Like the response is spontaneous and your response to the response is spontaneous, but it's good to go in with a plan. Thank you for watching this Adventurous Kids episode.
What did you learn today?
Adventurous Kids.
Adventurous Kids.
What was the most interesting fact?
Adventurous Kids.
Adventurous Kids.
Adventurous